Picture this: a candle guttering in the dark, its flame bending like a conspirator leaning close. You hear the scrape of boots on stone, echoing down a corridor where every shadow feels alive. Somewhere behind those heavy wooden doors, voices murmur in Latin, vows whispered with a weight that could change empires. Imagine stepping into Rome in the year 1540, where a soldier-turned-mystic named Ignatius of Loyola gathers a handful of companions and offers the Pope not just their loyalty, but their very souls. They call themselves the Society of Jesus, but the world will come to know them by another name, the Jesuits. From these hushed beginnings, they will stretch their influence across continents, shaping kings, charting stars, guiding empires, and unsettling monarchs who whisper of spies cloaked in cassocks. Some will call them saints, others puppeteers. And always, their footsteps echo in the silence of power. So, shall we walk with them? Shall we follow the flicker of their candlelight through the centuries, through classrooms, courts, jungles, and chambers where secrets were traded like relics? If you're ready, lean closer. The journey begins in the shadows. Imagine the smell first, because history always has a smell. The streets of Rome in 1540 were thick with it. Smoke from hearths, incense from chapels, sewage trickling in narrow gutters, and above it all the faint perfume of orange blossoms drifting from hidden gardens behind high stone walls. The Eternal City was not just marble and grandeur, it was also mud, sweat, and whispers. And it was here, in this restless, teeming heart of Christendom, that something new was born. But to understand the birth of the Jesuits, we must step backward a little. Not far, just into the life of a man who walked with a limp, carried a soldier's scars, and whose mind, restless as the Tiber, had been remade in fire. His name was Inigo Lopez de Loyola. You and I might simply call him Ignatius. Picture him first as a young man, not yet saintly, not yet broken. A courtier ambitious, strutting through the Spanish court with polished boots and a sword that gleamed in the sunlight. He was not the image of a holy ascetic, no. He was proud, vain, and fond of duels. The young Loyola carried himself with the confidence of one who believed glory waited for him, somewhere beyond the next hill, the next fortress wall. And then Pamplona. It is 1521, and cannons roar. A French army lays siege to the city, and Ignatius, ever eager for valor, refuses to surrender. He stands on the walls with sword in hand, ready to inspire courage by the sheer stubbornness of his stance. And then, in an instant that would split his life in two, a cannonball smashes his leg. Bone shatters. Blood pours. His body falls. The dream of worldly glory crumbles into the dust of Pamplona's battlements. Most men would have died. He did not. He was carried back to his family's castle in Loyola, where surgeons with more knives than mercy cut and sawed to repair what they could. Imagine the scene: rough hands pressing him down, the sickly sweet reek of infection, his own gritted teeth as bone was rebroken to mend poorly healed fractures. He survives, but forever after he walks with a limp, a reminder carved into his flesh that the world had other plans for him. It is in that long, slow recovery, lying in bed, staring at ceilings while his leg throbs, that Ignatius discovers a new battlefield. Someone places 2 books by his side. Not romances of knights and ladies, which he craves, but volumes of saints' lives and the life of Christ. With nothing else to read, he turns the pages. And slowly, as days turn to weeks, something happens. The fantasies of knighthood that once thrilled him now leave him restless, dissatisfied. But the stories of saints, of men and women who gave up everything for God, those leave him strangely at peace. A new fire begins to burn. When he can finally walk again, however painfully, he does not return to court. Instead, he sets out on pilgrimage. Picture him, clothes exchanged for the coarse garb of a beggar, a pilgrim's staff in his hand, limping along dusty roads. He gives away his fine sword, kneels before shrines, spends nights in caves where shadows dance on the stone walls like demons mocking him. He prays, he fasts, he writes. And slowly, from those nights of self-torment and visions, comes a book that will shape generations, the Spiritual Exercises. But we are moving too quickly. Let us linger here. The exercises are not simply prayers. They are weapons forged in silence. They are drills of the soul, training a man's mind as a soldier trains his body. Meditations on sin, on hell, on the life of Christ, on the meaning of surrender. They demand not passive belief, but active imagination. You must place yourself in the scenes of Scripture, smell the smoke of hellfire, feel the wood of the cross, hear the voice of Christ calling. To follow these exercises is to be remade, to be broken and reassembled until only obedience and purpose remain. Ignatius becomes convinced. He will serve not kings, not earthly lords, but Christ himself, and through Christ, his vicar on earth, the Pope. Now imagine him wandering into Paris, a city of students and scholars, in the 1520s. Thin, limping, with eyes that burn with a fervor half mad, half divine. He is no longer the vain courtier, but neither is he a serene saint. He is a man in transition, drawing companions to him not with wealth or status, but with sheer force of conviction. Here, in the rooms of the University of Paris, he finds his first followers. Young men, brilliant men. Francis Xavier, fiery, ambitious, who dreams of glory in the East. Peter Faber, gentle, hesitant, yet deeply spiritual. Others too, each drawn to this strange Spaniard who speaks with the certainty of one who has touched eternity. They study, they pray, they make vows together, not of comfort, but of sacrifice. It is in 1534, in a small chapel at Montmartre in Paris, that they gather and swear their lives away. Picture the scene, the smell of wax, the flicker of candlelight, the air heavy with silence. They kneel, their voices hushed but steady, vowing chastity, poverty, and, most striking of all, obedience. Not just to God in some abstract sense, but to a living man in Rome, the Pope. They promise to go wherever he sends them, to the ends of the earth if need be. It is loyalty beyond kingship, beyond nation, beyond self. Years pass. They walk, they preach, they beg for bread. Some sail across seas. Others bury themselves in the streets of Venice and Rome. Always they gather again, refining their bond, strengthening their vow. And then at last, in 1540, the world takes notice. Pope Paul III, himself a man of sharp vision, sees in Ignatius and his companions a tool the Church desperately needs. For Europe is fracturing. The Protestant Reformation has split Christendom, new worlds are opening across oceans, and the old order is trembling. Rome needs soldiers, but not soldiers of steel. Soldiers of the Spirit. Disciples who can debate, persuade, teach, and if necessary, die. And so, in a papal bull, the Society of Jesus is born. Stop for a moment, and imagine that ink drying on parchment in some Vatican chamber. Imagine the weight of it. From a wounded soldier's bed in Spain to a worldwide order recognized by the Pope himself, the leap is staggering. The Jesuits now have a name, a charter, a mission. They are not monks locked behind cloisters. They are not friars bound to a single town. They are mobile, disciplined, obedient. An army without swords, a legion whose weapons are books, sermons, schools, and unflinching loyalty. And from the very beginning, whispers begin to spread. What sort of men are these, who kneel to no king but only to Rome? Who move in silence, who speak with silver tongues, who slip into courts and classrooms and emerge with princes and peasants alike hanging on their words? Are they saints, or spies? But those are shadows yet to come. For now, in the flicker of 1540, they are only beginning. Picture them walking the streets of Rome, black cassocks swaying, heads bowed, lips murmuring prayers. Imagine the smell of parchment in their hands, the clatter of sandals on cobblestones, the murmurs of passers-by whose scents, though they do not yet understand that something new has entered the world. Something disciplined, dangerous, and devoted. And so the order is born, not in noise but in silence. Not in the clash of arms, but in the scratch of quills and the whisper of vows. From a shattered leg in Pamplona to the halls of the Vatican, the line is unbroken. And you and I now walk beside them, candlelight flickering, the corridors of history stretching ahead, dark and full of echoes. We leave behind the moment of birth, when parchment and papal ink turn dream into reality, and we follow them deeper, into the marrow of what made them different from any other order. Their vow. The air in Rome is restless. The papal bull has been signed. The Society of Jesus is no longer just a band of companions, but a recognized order. Yet paper alone does not bind men together. It is not ink that turns them into a force whispered about in palaces and feared in taverns. It is something harder, colder, deeper. It is the vow. Imagine standing in a small chapel, its walls heavy with silence, the air sweet with incense that clings to your skin. A handful of men kneel on the flagstones, their cassocks brushing dust, their eyes fixed not on each other but on the crucifix above the altar. Their voices are low, steady, almost swallowed by the stone. They swear not only poverty and chastity. Those vows are old, familiar, worn like the habits of countless monks before them. No, the difference is in the third vow. Obedience. Theirs is not a soft obedience, not a vague nod to discipline. This is obedience sharpened to a blade's edge. Absolute. Total. One command, one response. The Pope's voice will be their compass, Rome their true homeland. The Jesuit does not choose his mission, does not negotiate, does not delay. If told to sail for Japan, he sails. If told to enter a heretic's court, he goes. If told to walk into fire, he walks. It is this vow, this almost militaristic surrender, that sets them apart. Ignatius, ever the soldier, shapes the order not as a monastery, but as a regiment of souls. They are Christ's militia, an army of the Spirit drilled in silence and forged in loyalty. The word spreads quickly. These men call themselves soldiers of God. And some whisper the phrase with reverence. Others with unease. Picture a nobleman in Paris, hearing rumors of these black-robed priests who take orders only from Rome. He leans close to his advisor, voice low, eyes wary. Are they missionaries or spies? A king in Madrid receives a letter from one of his ministers. The Jesuits move with strange discipline. They are everywhere and nowhere, loyal not to crown, but to the Pope alone. A mother in Venice watches her son return from a Jesuit college with eyes afire, speaking of obedience, as if it were salvation. Obedience. It is both their shield and their weapon. Yet within the vow, there is a secret gradation. At first, like other orders, they bind themselves to poverty, chastity, and obedience. But soon another layer is added, one that will define them, a special vow of obedience to the Pope regarding missions. It is whispered with awe, and with suspicion, for it makes them unlike any monks, friars, or canons. They are Rome's chosen blades, to be thrust wherever Christendom is threatened. Think of the implications. In a time when monarchs cling fiercely to power, here is a group of men whose allegiance bypasses kings entirely. They kneel not before crown but before tiara. When a Jesuit steps into the service of a prince, the prince must know, above his throne, invisible yet present, stands the Pope, holding the strings. Is it loyalty, or is it infiltration? The line blurs. Ignatius himself explains the vow not as blind servitude, but as perfect freedom through surrender. He tells his companions, to obey is to align oneself with God's will, for the Pope is Christ's vicar. To resist is to fracture the unity of the Church. And yet, in practice, the vow demands a death of the self. Jesuits are taught to be, like a corpse, in the hands of their superiors. A chilling phrase, cadaver obedience. No will, no resistance, only movement according to command. You pause, perhaps, hearing those words. Like a corpse. Imagine yourself in that chapel, repeating them with trembling lips. Could you do it? Could you surrender so fully that your thoughts are no longer yours, your choices dissolved into another man's command? The Jesuits did. And from that surrender, they rose into power. The exercises prepared them for this. Remember those long nights of Ignatius in his cave, drilling the soul like a soldier drills muscle? That discipline is now imposed on every recruit. To enter the society is not to join a fraternity of scholars, but to march into a crucible. Novices are tested with humiliations, with obedience to absurd commands, with missions to beg for bread in the streets, to endure ridicule and hardship, to erase pride and polish the soul until only obedience gleams. Those who flinch do not remain. Those who endure are remade. And when they emerge, they are uncanny. Kings marvel at their eloquence, their presence, their certainty. A Jesuit walks into a palace and speaks not as one man, but as if the voice of the church itself has entered the room. His words cut, persuade, bind. How? Because behind him stands the weight of Rome, the vow that chains him, the invisible thread of obedience running from his lips to the Pope's hand. Listen carefully. Do you hear it? The murmurs growing in Europe's courts. They are too disciplined. They are too loyal to Rome. They move as if guided by one mind, one will. Who are they really serving? The vow that unites them also casts suspicion like a shadow. But for the Jesuits, suspicion is irrelevant. They believe themselves chosen, anointed for this very role. And obedience, to Rome, to their general, to their mission, is their crown of honor. It is not slavery, but glory. So we walk with them deeper now. Out of that Roman chapel, into the streets again. Past merchants hawking olives, past beggars muttering for alms, past noblemen whispering behind cloaks. Everywhere, their black cassocks ripple. Everywhere, rumors trail them. And in the center of it all, in a modest Roman house, Ignatius of Loyola writes letters late into the night. The flicker of his candle making shadows leap like restless spirits. Those letters carry instructions across Europe, across seas, across empires. And the men who receive them obey, utterly, immediately. No hesitation, no question. Because they are Jesuits. Because they have taken the vow. The vow of obedience was the spine of the society. But flesh had to be laid upon it, and Ignatius of Loyola knew instinctively where the true battle of the 16th century would be fought. Not only on the bloody fields where Catholics and Protestants clashed, but in the minds of the young. The Reformation had shown that ideas could topple kingdoms. Luther's hammer at Wittenberg was proof enough. If faith was to endure, it would need not only priests but teachers, not only pulpits but schools. And so the Jesuits turned to education, not as a sideline, but as their greatest weapon. Imagine walking through the narrow streets of Rome in the 1550s. Past taverns, past bakeries, past the stench of the Tiber. Suddenly you hear it, the murmur of voices reciting Latin, the scrape of quills, the stern command of a master correcting pronunciation. You follow the sound and find a Jesuit college, one of the first, modest in appearance but already magnetic, drawing the sons of noblemen and merchants alike. Inside, the air is thick with chalk dust and candle smoke. Wooden desks creak beneath restless boys. On the walls, crucifixes watch silently as lessons unfold. A Jesuit stands at the front, cassock falling straight to the floor, his voice cutting the air with precision. He does not merely teach grammar. He trains the tongue, the memory, the will. Each recitation is a battle drill for the mind. Each debate is a sparring match in the war of words. This is not rote drudgery. This is formation. And the Jesuits excel at it. Their Ratio Studiorum, the plan of studies, will eventually become famous. But even before it is codified, a pattern emerges. The classics are their foundation: Cicero, Virgil, Aristotle. But woven through it all is theology, philosophy, rhetoric. To study in a Jesuit school is to be steeped not only in knowledge but in eloquence. The young men who emerge from these halls do not merely repeat, they persuade. They are forged into instruments capable of defending Catholicism with dazzling words, with logic sharp as steel. And the demand grows. By the late 16th century, Jesuit colleges spring up across Europe like wildfire. Paris, Lisbon, Vienna, Prague, Ingolstadt, Antwerp. Soon hundreds, then thousands of boys pour through their gates. The sons of dukes sit beside the sons of tailors. The order prides itself on teaching without charge, for knowledge is not to be sold but spread. And so the Jesuits earn both admiration and suspicion, admiration for their brilliance, suspicion for the invisible loyalty that ties every teacher back to Rome. Imagine yourself, now, seated on a bench in one of these colleges. The air smells of ink and sweat. Your hand aches from copying declensions. Your neighbor whispers a line of Cicero under his breath. The Jesuit master's eyes sweep the room like a hawk. He calls suddenly on you. You rise, your voice trembling, and attempt to recite the lines drilled into your memory. If you falter, the correction is swift, the lesson unforgettable. If you succeed, a flicker of approval crosses his face, enough to make you burn with pride. And when classes end, the training continues. Theatrical performances are encouraged, moral plays, staged in Latin, designed to sharpen the tongue and impress audiences of parents and dignitaries. Students declaim speeches, argue cases, write verses. The whole world becomes a stage, and the Jesuits ensure their pupils know how to perform upon it. From these classrooms come not only priests, but lawyers, statesmen, poets, scientists. Europe's elite begins to bear a Jesuit imprint. The monarch of tomorrow may well have sat once on a hard wooden bench, staring at a crucifix while a Jesuit drilled logic into his skull. And that, perhaps, is more terrifying to a king than any army of mercenaries. For mercenaries fight battles. Educated minds shape empires. You can almost hear the unease whispered in courts. The Jesuits are raising our sons. The Jesuits are filling their heads with doctrine. Whose men will they be, when they grow? Ours or Rome's? And yet the lure is irresistible. Their schools are the best. Their students outperform others. To deny your child a Jesuit education is to deny him success. So nobles send their sons, even as they mutter suspicions, because ambition overcomes fear. Meanwhile, the Jesuits expand beyond Europe. In far-off Goa, in the shining cities of China, in the dense jungles of Brazil, Jesuit schools take root. Their classrooms are improvised, a hut with a thatched roof, a converted temple, a corner of a governor's palace. Wherever they go, they teach. They learn languages, translate texts, adapt to cultures, but always, they train minds to bend toward Christ and Rome. It is an empire built without walls, an empire of minds. And it grows silently, invisibly, until its reach surpasses that of many kingdoms. By 1600, the Jesuits oversee hundreds of schools, thousands of pupils. By 1700, their network spans continents. A boy in Antwerp learns the same Latin declensions as one in Lima. A student in Beijing studies geometry that echoes lessons in Rome. It is unity without borders, discipline without armies. And the results are dazzling. Jesuit-trained men fill courts, universities, bishoprics. Their rhetoric sways parliaments, their logic dismantles opponents, their polish charms monarchs. Even those who despise them cannot deny their brilliance. And so admiration and fear deepen together, twined like ivy on stone. Picture the corridors of a Jesuit college late at night. The candles gutter low. A boy bends over parchment, scratching Latin lines, while outside his window the city sleeps. Somewhere in the building, a Jesuit paces, rehearsing tomorrow's lecture. The silence is heavy, broken only by the rustle of paper. And in that silence, an empire grows, unseen, unheard, yet relentless. The vow has been transformed into practice. Obedience to the Pope has become education of the young. The Society of Jesus has moved from chapel to classroom, from whispered vows to echoing halls filled with voices. And in those voices, in the cadence of Cicero, the logic of Aristotle, the theology of Aquinas, lies the future of Catholic power. And so we walk on, you and I, down those long colonnades where boys in black gowns hurry to class, where bells toll to mark the hours, where learning itself becomes both sword and shield. We walk through the empire of education, and we begin to sense what kings and princes already whisper in unease. The Jesuits are not merely teaching. They are shaping the very world. Step with me now into a crowded square in Antwerp. The year is 1565. The bells have rung, the market stalls are shuttered, and a sea of people gathers, pressing shoulder to shoulder. Some climb onto barrels, others perch on walls, all craning their necks to see the black-robed figure who has mounted a wooden platform. A Jesuit. He raises his hand, and somehow, the murmur of the crowd fades. When he speaks, his voice carries not only across the square, but into the marrow of every listener. It is not loud, but it is clear, sharp as a trumpet blast and soft as a confession in the same breath. He tells a story, not abstract theology, not a dry lesson, but a living tale. A sinner stumbling through life, the weight of his sins like chains around his neck. You see the man, you feel his despair. And then, the Jesuit's voice rises, like sunlight breaking through clouds, and he paints the mercy of Christ, the glory of redemption. Tears prick eyes in the crowd. Men cross themselves. Women clutch their rosaries. The sermon is not a lecture, it is a spell. And when it ends, the listeners leave not only persuaded but transformed. This, more than anything, was the Jesuit gift, mastery of the word. They were trained for it with relentless care. In their colleges, rhetoric was not an ornament but a weapon. Every Jesuit learned to command language as a general commands troops, with precision, with timing, with devastating effect. They studied the ancients, absorbed Cicero's cadence, Quintilian's structure, Aristotle's logic. They drilled endlessly, speaking aloud until their voices could move from whisper to thunder, from laughter to tears, as smoothly as a hand turning a page. But they were not content with classical polish. They made preaching an art of immersion. A Jesuit sermon was theater. It painted images so vivid that listeners felt themselves standing at the foot of the cross, or stumbling in the smoke of hell, or kneeling in the glow of heaven's gates. It used sound, gesture, rhythm. A pause here, a sudden shout there, a silence so deep the audience leaned forward as if afraid to miss a word. Imagine entering a church in Prague during Advent. The pews are packed, candles flicker against vaulted stone, and the air is heavy with incense. A Jesuit mounts the pulpit, his cassock sweeping the steps. He begins softly, telling of Bethlehem, of the child wrapped in swaddling clothes. The listeners smile, their hearts warmed. And then, with a sudden shift, his voice rises, fierce as a storm. "And what of you? Do you bring him gifts or do you spit upon his mercy?" The congregation gasps. Some drop their eyes in shame, others murmur assent. The sermon surges like a tide, sweeping them all along, until at last he closes with a gentle plea for repentance. The confessional lines afterward stretch into the night. This was Jesuit genius. They made the invisible visible, the abstract tangible. They knew the power of story, of image, of performance. And it was not only in churches. Jesuits preached in marketplaces, in fields, in noble courts, on ships crossing the Atlantic. Wherever words could reach, they reached. A missionary in India learns the cadences of Tamil. Another in Japan adapts Christian teaching into the structure of a no play. Another in Brazil weaves biblical parables with local folklore. Each one a master of rhetoric, but rhetoric tailored like a suit to fit the culture he entered. Protestants noticed. Luther had his hymns and pamphlets, Calvin his sermons. The Jesuits countered with a barrage of eloquence that seemed endless. Polemic tracts poured from their presses. pamphlets, disputations, dialogues. Their words flooded Europe. And unlike many scholastic theologians who argued in dense Latin unintelligible to most, the Jesuits wrote with clarity, with punch, with the ability to sway not just scholars but ordinary men and women. But eloquence is dangerous. Words can inspire, but they can also manipulate. Monarchs began to wonder, if a Jesuit can move the hearts of peasants with a sermon, can he not also move nobles, ministers, even kings? A Jesuit confessor at court is not just a priest, he is a whisper in the ear of power. And whispers, as history shows, can topple thrones. Still, the Society of Jesus leaned fully into this mastery. They believed it their duty to preach as Christ preached, to stir hearts, to call sinners back. And so they trained their men with brutal rigor. A Jesuit novice might be ordered to preach on a moment's notice, in a town square, before strangers. If he faltered, his superiors noted it. If he thrived, he was refined further. The goal was not mere competence, but brilliance. To fail to move an audience was to waste a soul. Even in their letters, their words burned. Ignatius himself wrote countless missives to Jesuit houses across Europe, letters alive with urgency and precision. His style was direct, his tone both fatherly and commanding. Later generals would refine the art, shaping correspondence into a lifeline that connected the entire global order. Jesuit letters from China or Peru could be read aloud in Rome with the same power as sermons. They knew words traveled faster than ships, that a letter could inflame faith or suspicion across continents. Let us pause for a moment inside one such scene. Picture a Jesuit in the court of a Catholic king. The chamber is golden with candlelight, courtiers shuffle, whisper, bow. The Jesuit enters, modest yet poised. He speaks, perhaps a few words of consolation, perhaps a counsel on conscience. The king listens. No sword is drawn, no threat uttered. But when the Jesuit leaves, the king's mind is altered. That is power. Not by decree, not by blade, but by word. And across Europe, this power spreads unease. Protestants call them deceivers, masters of sophistry. Monarchs suspect them of manipulating minds. And yet, their churches are full, their schools crowded, their sermons remembered for decades. Even enemies admit, no one commands language like a Jesuit. It is here, in this mastery of the word, that we glimpse the heart of their dual nature. They are shepherds and strategists, confessors and persuaders. To some, saints. To others, conspirators. But always, their voices linger, echoing long after the cassock disappears from sight. And so we move forward, the sound of those voices still ringing in our ears. Out of the marketplaces, out of the candlelit chapels, into the wider world where those words will travel further still, across oceans, into jungles, into palaces. For the Jesuits' next step will not be confined to Europe at all. They will set sail, in silence and in faith, on secret missions abroad. The Jesuits' words still echo in our ears, the cadences of sermons lingering like the aftertaste of incense. But now the sound shifts. It becomes the creak of timber, the rush of sails, the slap of waves against hulls. For the Jesuits were not content to preach only in Europe. Their vow to the Pope carried them further, far beyond the Alps, far beyond even the Mediterranean. They went abroad. Picture the docks of Lisbon in the mid-16th century. The air reeks of salt, tar, and sweat. Sailors haul ropes, crates stud against planks, gulls scream overhead. Amidst the chaos, black cassocks stand out like shadows against the glare of sun on water. Jesuits, preparing to board. They clutch small satchels, books, crucifixes, little else. They do not bring wealth, nor fine garments. They bring words, prayers, conviction. A captain eyes them warily, muttering to his mate that these priests will either bless the voyage or doom it. One of the most famous among them is Francis Xavier. Imagine him on the deck, the wind tugging at his robes, his eyes fixed eastward. Once, he dreamed of academic fame. Now, He burns to set foot in lands no missionary has yet trod. He will die far from Spain, on a lonely island within sight of China, but before that he will stride through India, Japan, the Moluccas, tireless, fervent, aflame. His letters home are electric, filled with longing, with victories, with desperation for more men to come and join him. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. He writes, echoing scripture, his words spattered with the spray of foreign seas. And he is not alone. Jesuits scatter like sparks thrown from a forge. One disappears into the tangled green of Brazil's forests, learning the tongue of the Tupi, shaping catechisms from borrowed words. Another stands before a daimyo in Japan, bowing with careful precision, explaining Christian mysteries in terms borrowed from Buddhist philosophy. Another stoops in an African port, ministering to captives in chains, whispering prayers over bodies broken by the slave trade. They adapt as chameleons. They learn languages with ferocious speed. They dress in local garb when needed. Matteo Ricci in China dons the robes of a Confucian scholar, his beard long, his knowledge of astronomy and geometry dazzling Mandarins who had dismissed Europeans as barbarians. In India, Roberto de Nobili wears the saffron robes of a Brahmin, mastering Sanskrit, presenting himself not as a foreigner but as a sage. Some cry scandal at such methods, disguises, deceptions, accommodation to pagan custom. But the Jesuits call it strategy. To win souls, one must first win hearts, and to win hearts, one must speak in familiar rhythms. Not all missions end in glory. Many end in blood. In England, Jesuits slip ashore in the dead of night, cloaked not in cassocks but in disguises. They carry hidden chalices, scraps of Latin liturgy, their very presence punishable by death. Edmund Campion, captured, is dragged to the Tower, racked until his joints crack, then hanged, drawn, and quartered. His last words are prayers. Even in his agony, his eloquence shines, and his execution only feeds the legend. In Protestant lands, Jesuits are hunted like foxes. To some, they are martyrs. To others, infiltrators. Always their missions are shadowed by danger. Yet the danger is part of the allure. They are the Pope's commandos, his silent agents. Monarchs mutter, are they preachers or spies? Are they confessors or conspirators? When a Jesuit slips into a foreign court, whispers multiply. Did he come to teach, or to observe, to report back to Rome what kings dare not reveal? The truth lies somewhere in the shadows. Certainly, Jesuits wrote endless letters home, not only about theology, but about geography, politics, trade. Their reports map rivers in Paraguay, chart stars in China, describe customs in Ethiopia. The Vatican treasures these letters as intelligence as much as devotion. And so the Jesuits' missions, however holy, carry a second edge. Knowledge itself is power, and the Jesuits gather it with meticulous care. Imagine yourself traveling with them. The sea is vast, the nights long, the stars blazing overhead. You huddle on the deck beside a Jesuit who whispers prayers over the sick. At dawn, you disembark on some alien shore. The air is heavy with scents you do not know, spices, blossoms, smoke. Children stare at you with wide eyes, merchants mutter behind hands, priests of other gods watch warily. And beside you, the Jesuit smiles, bows, begins to speak in their tongue, weaving Christ into metaphors they understand. It is almost alchemy, this transformation of faith into local speech. You feel awe and unease. For this is not conquest by sword. It is conquest by persuasion. And persuasion is subtle, invisible, irresistible. Not all are persuaded. In Japan, suspicion grows. By the early 17th century, the shogunate bans Christianity, seeing it as a foreign infection. Jesuits are hunted, crucified, burned. Some refuse to renounce their faith even as flames consume them. Others, under torture, break. Their stories ripple across Europe, tales of steadfast martyrs and tragic apostasies, fueling both admiration and doubt. In the jungles of South America, meanwhile, Jesuits build something stranger still, entire communities, the famous reductions of Paraguay. Settlements where indigenous people live in semi-communal harmony, protected from slavers, guided by Jesuit priests. To some, they are utopias. To others, they are prisons in disguise, experiments in social control. Kings eye them with suspicion, an empire within an empire, loyal not to crown but to Rome. The suspicion will one day prove fatal, but for now the missions flourish, flutes and choirs echoing in jungle chapels, liturgies sung in Guarani. The Jesuits abroad are both admired and hated, both protectors and meddlers, both saints and agents. Always the duality remains. Their obedience drives them outward, their eloquence sustains them, their adaptability astonishes. Yet everywhere they go, they leave behind both converts and controversy. Close your eyes now and listen. The ocean wind fades. Instead, you hear the murmurs of courtiers in Madrid, the suspicious whispers of ministers in Paris, the hushed prayers of prisoners in England, the chants of scholars in Beijing. Jesuit voices everywhere, in every tongue. They move like shadows across the world. And Europe begins to tremble, for what army can stop such men, who slip past borders, who conquer without swords, who vanish into the night leaving only echoes behind? And so we leave them, for now, scattered across continents, their black cassocks dusty with road, damp with jungle rain, salt-streaked from sea. They are abroad, but their influence will return home, born not only in letters and maps but in suspicion. For kings will soon ask themselves, if Jesuits serve the Pope alone, then are they not also the Pope's eyes, the Pope's ears? And that question will hang heavy in the courts of Europe. The whisper is already forming, the Jesuits are spies. Imagine the corridors of Madrid in the late 16th century. Tapestries muffle footsteps, courtiers cluster in corners, servants glide silently with eyes lowered. Yet among the murmurs of inheritance, war, and trade, another murmur intrudes, Jesuits. A minister leans close to his king. They write too many letters, sire. They carry knowledge across borders as freely as smugglers. They confess the souls of princes and yet answer only to Rome. Can such men be trusted? It is the perfect formula for paranoia. The Jesuits obey no crown, no parliament, no emperor. Their allegiance is to the Pope, and the Pope alone. Their discipline makes them seem like a secret militia. Their eloquence makes them seem like master manipulators. Their missions abroad make them seem like gatherers of intelligence. And in an age when espionage thrives, when courtiers bribe servants, when ambassadors read each other's letters by candlelight, when entire wars pivot on whispered secrets, the Jesuits look suspiciously like the Pope's very own intelligence service. Consider England under Elizabeth I. Jesuits slip ashore in disguise, carrying rosaries hidden inside the false bottoms of chests, mass books tucked into double linings. To Catholics, they are priests returning to feed a starving flock. To Elizabeth's ministers, they are enemy agents, sent not to console but to incite rebellion. The discovery of Jesuits in hiding becomes headline news, captured in priest holes, dragged from barns, hanged as traitors. Were they simply preachers? Or were they conspirators, coordinating with Catholic powers abroad to topple the Protestant queen? To Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, there is no difference. A Jesuit on English soil is a weapon pointed at the throne. Or take France, where assassins stalk kings and religious wars convulse the land. After Henry III is murdered by a fanatical monk, suspicion leaps instantly to the Jesuits. Did their fiery rhetoric inspire regicide? Were their confessors whispering treason in royal ears? Paris seethes with rumor. Jesuit classrooms are not schools, but breeding grounds for subversion. Pamphlets depict them as puppet masters, their strings tied to Rome, their hands guiding daggers into royal flesh. And Spain, even in its Catholic zeal, wavers uneasily. The Jesuits are Spaniards, yes, and the crown benefits from their missions abroad. Yet even here, The king's ministers wonder, how much do these men tell Rome? How many secrets pass from Madrid's court into papal ears through the confessional? A Jesuit confessor kneeling beside a king's bed is both the holiest of advisors and the most dangerous of liabilities. Who else enjoys such intimacy, such access, such silence wrapped around a sovereign's conscience? The charge of spying grows not only from paranoia but from evidence, or at least what looks like it. Jesuit letters arrive in Rome describing the exact temper of foreign courts, the policies of distant governors, the shifting moods of monarchs. These letters are not written in code, but they do not need to be. Information flows so naturally through their networks that it might as well be intelligence. What merchant, what diplomat, what soldier would not give anything for such eyes and ears? The Jesuits themselves deny it fiercely. They are no spies, they insist, but shepherds. They gather knowledge for souls, not for politics. If their letters describe kings and customs, it is only to better minister to them. Their loyalty to the Pope is spiritual, not conspiratorial. And yet, the line between spirit and politics is razor thin in the 16th century. A whispered confession can shape a king's policy. A sermon can tilt a noble faction toward rebellion. A single letter can travel faster than any diplomat. Picture the Protestant polemicists sharpening their pens. Pamphlets circulate with lurid titles: The Secret Practices of the Jesuits, The Society of Deceivers, The Invisible Army of Rome. Woodcuts show Jesuits lurking like shadows, their faces half hidden, their hands extended toward unsuspecting monarchs. To Protestants, they are the very embodiment of subterfuge. The Pope's black-robed infiltrators, creeping silently into schools, confessionals, courts. But the fear is not only Protestant. Catholic monarchs too bristle. Louis XIV of France, centuries later, will mutter that, "In every Jesuit I see a man who would rather obey another master than me." The accusation of spying, once seated, never fades. It grows like ivy, clinging to every wall they touch. And yet pause with me in the candlelit chapel of a Jesuit house. Here, men kneel in silence, lips murmuring prayers, eyes fixed on crucifixes. They do not look like spies. Their discipline is real, their devotion palpable. To accuse them of espionage is to miss their sincerity. And yet, sincerity and strategy can coexist. A man can pray and still send a letter filled with careful observations. A man can serve God and still serve, unwittingly or not, as a conduit of intelligence. This is the paradox of the Jesuits. Saints to some, spies to others. Shepherds of souls, but also gatherers of secrets. Perhaps not by intention, but intention matters little to monarchs who fear for their thrones. And so we step once more through the corridors of Europe, listening. In taverns, whispers of Jesuits plotting regicide. In courts, murmurs of Jesuits steering kings. In marketplaces, pamphlets blackening their name. Always the suspicion, always the shadow. From their vow of obedience, suspicion grows. From their education empire, suspicion grows. From their mastery of words, suspicion grows. And from their missions abroad, suspicion grows most of all. For who else but spies travel so far, learn so much, send so many letters, and bow to no king? The answer, of course, is the Jesuits. Let us linger in France, Spain, and Portugal, in the very courts where monarchs muttered against these men in black, and in the pamphlets where they were depicted as a secret service cloaked in holiness. This will be an interlude of suspicion, rich and atmospheric, before we step into the figure of the Jesuit general himself. The air in Paris is sharp with the smell of smoke and horse dung, the chatter of vendors, the tension of a city that has known too much blood. France has been torn by decades of religious war, Catholics and Huguenots slashing each other's throats, entire cities drenched in slaughter. It is in this tinderbox that suspicion of the Jesuits burns brightest. In 1594, the city trembles. King Henry IV, the Protestant who has converted to Catholicism for the sake of his crown, rides through Paris. He is a man of pragmatism, a king trying to heal a fractured land. But as he passes near the College de Clermont, a Jesuit institution, a young man steps forward. Jean Chazelle. His blade flashes, striking at the king's face. The wound is shallow, but the city gasps. An assassination attempt. Chastel is captured, interrogated, executed. And in the fury that follows, eyes turn toward the Jesuits. Chastel, it is said, had been educated by them. Had he been inspired by Jesuit rhetoric? Had he absorbed their whispered disdain for heresy and compromise? Was the dagger he raised not his own, but one placed in his hand by black-robed mentors? The Parliament of Paris wastes no time. It declares the Jesuits dangerous, subversive, enemies of the king and the state. They are expelled from France. Pamphlets pour forth, each more lurid than the last. The Jesuits plot against the crown. The College of Treason. They are painted as insiders of regicide, as shadowy manipulators, as Rome's assassins. In coffee houses and taverns, the image takes hold, a Jesuit whispering in a boy's ear, a Jesuit hand guiding the blade that sought the king's life. And though Henry IV himself will later temper the fury, allowing Jesuits back, seeing their usefulness, the suspicion never dies. It lingers like smoke, the idea that Jesuits do not simply teach and preach, but plot, conspire, incite. Cross the Pyrenees now into Spain. Here, one might think, the Jesuits would be safe, embraced by the most Catholic of monarchies. But even in Madrid, suspicion gnaws. The Spanish crown rules an empire stretching across oceans, and in that empire Jesuits are everywhere. In Peru, they establish schools. In Mexico, they guide missions. In the Philippines, they preach and map islands. And always, their letters return to Rome. This troubles Spanish ministers. What secrets slip away in those letters? Reports of colonial governors, murmurs of local rebellions, whispers of corruption, all could find their way from Madrid's domains to the Pope's desk. To serve God is noble, yes. But what king tolerates men in his empire whose first obedience is to another master? Whispers begin in the corridors. The Jesuits know too much. The Jesuits see too much. The Jesuits are the Pope's informants. And though the crown continues to use them, for their schools are brilliant, their missions effective, unease thickens. In Portugal, too, suspicion deepens. The Jesuits are powerful there, shaping education, advising nobles, building missions overseas. Yet their power provokes envy, their influence resentment. Ministers mutter that the Jesuits act as if Portugal itself is secondary to their true sovereign, the Pope. When the crown quarrels with Rome, the Jesuits are caught in the middle, and always they are suspected of siding with the tiara over the crown. And feeding all of this suspicion is the literature of the age. Pamphlets multiply like weeds. In London, Geneva, Amsterdam, Paris, presses pour out denunciations of the Society of Jesus. The titles themselves are damning: the Jesuit cabal, Rome's invisible army, the secret service of the Vatican. Woodcuts show sinister figures in black, their faces hooded, their hands stretched like puppet strings over kings and maps of Europe. One popular image depicts a Jesuit as a spider at the center of a vast web. The threads run outward, to classrooms, confessionals, courts, colonies. And at the end of each thread dangles a monarch, a noble, a bishop. All ensnared, all manipulated by the silent spider. It is propaganda, yes, but propaganda so vivid it takes root in the imagination. Even those who do not believe it entirely find themselves glancing uneasily at the men in black who slip quietly through their streets. In some tracts, the Jesuits are accused of every crime imaginable: inciting rebellion, assassinating kings, poisoning chalices, seducing the young, even conjuring demons. The very excess of the charges betrays the fear they inspire. For to fear someone is to imagine them capable of anything. And thus, by the end of the 16th century, the Society of Jesus wears a double face. To their pupils, they are brilliant teachers. To their converts abroad, they are holy missionaries. But to their enemies, and even to their suspicious allies, they are the Pope's secret agents, a society not of Jesus but of subversion. Picture now the corridors of the Vatican itself. The Pope paces, reading reports from across the globe. Jesuit letters lie stacked on a desk, letters describing kings, colonies, rebellions, conversions. To him, they are tools, lifelines, glimpses of Christendom's pulse. But to kings and ministers beyond these walls, they are proof of conspiracy. And it is at this moment, when suspicion is thickest, when pamphlets scream of plots and monarchs whisper of spies, that attention turns to the figure at the center of the order. A man little known to the public, yet feared in whispers. The general of the Society of Jesus. The man they will call, with both awe and dread, the Black Pope. Picture a street in Rome in the late 16th century. The Vatican dome looms above, but down a quieter lane stands the Jesuit mother house, the Casa Professa. Its walls are modest, not palatial. There are no guards at its gates, no ostentatious trappings. Yet within those walls resides a power unlike any other. Here lives the superior general of the Society of Jesus, the man to whom every Jesuit bends his will, the man whose voice travels by letter across oceans, whose decisions ripple through empires. Why Black Pope? The answer lies in contrast. The true Pope wears white, visible to the world, enthroned in splendor. The Jesuit general wears black, his cassock blending into the shadows. The Pope reigns with ceremony, the general with silence. Yet some whisper that the general's reach is in many ways greater. For while the Pope commands bishops, the Jesuit general commands minds, thousands of men, all bound by the vow of cadaver obedience, moving at his word like limbs of a single body. Ignatius himself was the first, the founder, the general. But after his death in 1556, the office did not vanish. It endured, passed from one man to another, each chosen by Jesuit electors, each ruling until death. Unlike monarchs, unlike popes, there was no pomp to their succession, only the quiet transfer of immense authority. The general's role was absolute within the order. A Jesuit could not argue, could not disobey, could not hesitate. From Rome, the general might order a man to leave his home at a day's notice, to sail to India, to bury himself in Poland, to risk death in England. And that man would go. The general was not simply an administrator. He was commander, shepherd, strategist, father, and, to suspicious eyes, a hidden sovereign. Imagine him at his desk in Rome, candlelight flickering on stacks of letters. They come from Peru, describing silver mines and Indian conversions. From Japan, describing persecutions and hidden Christians. From France, describing court intrigues and theological battles. The general reads them all, digests them, responds with precision. His replies travel outward like veins of fire, igniting missions, guiding policies, shaping the course of the society. He does not appear in public, does not seek a throne, yet through pen and parchment he governs a global army of souls. Small wonder monarchs began to fear him. For what is a king, when within his own lands there are men who answer to another master? And not just any master, but one invisible, cloaked, distant, beyond reach? To Protestants, this was proof that the Jesuits were Rome's secret service. To some Catholics, it was proof that the Jesuits were a kingdom within a kingdom, a church within the church. And yet, the title Black Pope was not only insult. It carried a dark reverence. For even enemies admitted, no other order was so disciplined, no other general so commanding. He was seen as the shadow counterpart to the Pope himself. Where one ruled the church's visible structure, the other ruled its hidden nerve. But what of the man behind the title? Not all generals were alike. Some were fiery visionaries, others cool tacticians, others austere spiritual fathers. Yet all bore the same burden, absolute authority. And the Jesuits, in turn, bore their weight with that same eerie obedience. One can almost imagine stepping into the general's chambers. The room is sparse: a desk, shelves of letters, a crucifix on the wall. He is not dressed in splendor, but in the same black cassock as any Jesuit. His eyes are weary, but keen. He speaks softly, perhaps asking you where you are from, what mission you serve. And yet you feel it, the weight of command, the gravity of one who holds thousands of lives in his words. You realize why Europe whispers Black Pope. It is not the trappings, not the title, but the aura of unseen power. From this central figure, suspicion spreads outward. A Protestant pamphlet claims, the Black Pope rules the white. That is, the Jesuit general rules the Pope himself, steering papal policy behind closed doors. Is it true? Most likely not. But the Jesuits' influence at court, their whispering presence in confessionals, their endless letters to Rome, all fuel the myth. And myths, once born, live longer than truth. Consider the irony. The Jesuits, sworn to obedience, are accused of mastering their master. The general, a man hidden in modest rooms, is depicted as the most powerful sovereign in Europe. The Pope himself, it is said, bends to his counsel. Monarchs imagine shadows moving in the Vatican corridors, not the Pope's footsteps, but the general's, steering policy, plotting strategy, unseen. And so, the name Black Pope takes root. It is whispered in taverns, muttered in courts, shouted in pamphlets. It is meant as insult, yet it only deepens the aura of mystery. For in the age of suspicion, secrecy itself is power. Step with me, then, back into those Roman streets. The Casa Professa looms quiet, its walls plain, its windows shuttered. Passers-by hurry past without glancing. Inside, the general dips his pen in ink, writes a letter that will set a young Jesuit on a ship to China, another into a court in Prague, another into the wilderness of Paraguay. Outside, the world gossips of conspiracies, pamphlets decry spies, monarchs mutter of subversion. But inside, the work continues. Silent, tireless, obedient. And in that silence, the myth of the Black Pope grows. Imagine, if you will, being a young man in the late 16th century. Perhaps you are the son of a merchant in Antwerp, or a noble in Castile, or a farmer's boy whose brilliance has caught the eye of a Jesuit teacher. You have studied in their colleges, dazzled by their eloquence, stirred by their zeal. At last you feel the call, to join them, to wear the black cassock, to surrender yourself wholly. But entry is no simple matter. The Society of Jesus is not like other orders, where a postulant dons the habit after a year and takes vows swiftly. No. The Jesuits stretch initiation into a crucible lasting more than a decade. It is not entrance, but testing. Not acceptance, but formation. They call it probation, and it breaks or remakes a man. At first, you are stripped of everything familiar. The world you knew, family, property, ambition, is left behind. You are given a plain cassock, a crucifix, and silence. Your first year is one of trial, prayers before dawn, hours of meditation, the relentless spiritual exercises of Ignatius himself. You kneel for long stretches, imagining Christ's passion, your soul's sins, heaven and hell so vividly that your heart races, your body trembles. You are asked to write down your visions, to speak them to a confessor, to bare your soul without disguise. Then come the tests of humility. A novice might be sent to beg in the streets for bread, to endure ridicule and scorn. Another is ordered to clean latrines, to scrub floors, to nurse the sick and dying in hospitals. The work is not punishment, but purgation. Pride is scoured away, vanity humbled. If you cannot endure being mocked, if you cannot obey an absurd command without hesitation, you are not fit for the society. And then, the true trials. Superiors test obedience by sudden, arbitrary orders. Carry a log through the city without explanation. Preach in a market square with no preparation. Travel to a distant town with only a crucifix and a cloak. Refuse, hesitate, or question, and you are dismissed. Obey, and you prove yourself malleable, pliant, as Ignatius demanded, like a corpse in the hands of the order. Years pass. You study philosophy, theology, rhetoric. You are sent to teach, to preach, to labor. Always under scrutiny, always tested. At times you feel forgotten, and that too is part of the trial. The society is not interested in zeal without endurance. Only those who can suffer long years of obscurity, of discipline, of silence, will endure to the end. And then, if you persist, if you are judged worthy, the day of your final vows comes. It is unlike any ordinary ceremony. By then, you have lived in the order for more than a decade. You have already taken simple vows of poverty, chastity, obedience. But now comes the deeper binding. The professed Jesuit, the highest rank, takes the fourth vow, special obedience to the Pope regarding missions. This vow is spoken in a hushed chapel, before a crucifix, in the presence of superiors. Your voice trembles as you swear absolute loyalty, not just to God, not just to the order, but to Rome itself. And when you rise, you are no longer a novice, no longer in probation. You are a soldier of the society, a companion of Jesus. Little wonder, then, that outsiders spun myths around such a process. The secrecy of Jesuit initiation bred wild rumors. Pamphlets accused them of occult rites, of midnight oaths spoken over skulls, of conspiracies whispered in darkness. Some claimed they pledged to kill heretics, to overthrow monarchs, to poison chalices. Others painted them as sorcerers, their discipline born not of faith but of demonic enchantment. The truth was both simpler and stranger. There were no satanic masses, no blood oaths over altars. And yet, in a sense, the myths captured something real. The Jesuits were remade through their initiation into something uncanny. Their vow of obedience, their years of formation, their spiritual exercises, all forged men who seemed otherworldly in their resolve. Walk with me now into a Jesuit house at night. The corridors are dark, lit only by oil lamps. In a small chapel, novices kneel in silence, their faces shadowed, their bodies weary. A superior paces slowly, his voice low as he reads a meditation from Ignatius. The novices close their eyes, imagining the flames of hell, the wounds of Christ, the glory of heaven. Hours pass. Still they kneel, still they imagine, still they endure. Outside, the city sleeps. Inside, souls are being tempered like steel. It is not sorcery, but it feels like transformation. And this transformation, this slow remaking of men, is what made the Jesuits appear so mysterious, so threatening. Other orders accepted men quickly, clothed them, blessed them. The Jesuits broke them first, then rebuilt them. And the result was a man who seemed no longer his own, but wholly the order's, obedient to superiors, obedient to Rome, a soldier disguised as a priest. Even today, the echoes of that initiation linger. The exercises are still prayed, the long years of probation still endured, the vows still spoken. But in the 16th and 17th centuries, the effect was explosive. Jesuits emerged from initiation not as monks enclosed in cloisters, but as warriors unleashed upon the world. And so the mystery grew. To outsiders, the Jesuits seemed bound by secrets, initiated into a hidden brotherhood that gave them power ordinary men could not fathom. To the Jesuits themselves, the mystery was simply Christ, but clothed in the discipline of a soldier's life. Thus, when enemies whispered of initiation rites, of shadowed vows, of secrets, they were not entirely wrong. There was secrecy, there were hidden rituals, there was an iron discipline invisible to the world. And from these hidden corridors came men who changed nations. Now, as we leave these novices kneeling in their chapels, their faces pale with candlelight, their lips moving silently in prayer, let us walk onward. For initiation was only the beginning. Once formed, once vowed, these men did not remain in silence. They stepped boldly into politics, into diplomacy, into the very courts of kings. And there, their mystery only deepened, and their influence only grew. Imagine a royal chamber in Madrid. The ceiling is high, painted with angels, the air heavy with incense from a nearby chapel. Courtiers murmur, parchment crackles, guards shift their pikes. On a velvet chair sits the king, wearied by war, distracted by alliances, troubled by conscience. Into this chamber walks a man in black, plain cassock, no ornament, no sword. He bows, speaks softly, and takes his place not at the council table, but at the king's side, as confessor. What power lies in such a role? To hear the sins of a monarch, to absolve or to deny, to remind a sovereign that his conscience is not his own but God's? No minister, no general, no ambassador has such intimacy. A Jesuit confessor hears what no one else dares to know. And in that whispering exchange, behind the veil of secrecy, within the sanctity of confession, decisions of kingdoms may bend. This is where suspicion deepens. Did the Jesuits steer kings? Did they use the confessional to press papal interests, to sway royal policies, to guide diplomacy? Many thought so. Ministers complained that they could not rival the invisible sway of the black cassock. Enemies claimed the Jesuits used the ear of princes to serve Rome, not the crown. And pamphleteers had a field day, depicting kings as marionettes, their strings pulled by confessors in shadow. Yet monarchs often sought them willingly. For the Jesuits had a gift: they combined intellect, eloquence, and spiritual gravity. Unlike courtiers hungry for favor, Jesuits often appeared disinterested in wealth or advancement. Their poverty gave them an air of incorruptibility. Their learning made them formidable advisers. And their discipline meant they spoke with confidence, unshaken by fear of dismissal. To a king surrounded by flatterers and schemers, such a presence was both rare and valuable. Take Austria and the Habsburgs. Jesuits became confessors to emperors, counselors in the great conflicts of Reformation and Counter-Reformation. In Vienna, they guided Catholic revival, advising on laws, shaping alliances. In Spain, Philip III and Philip IV both relied heavily on Jesuit confessors, to the point where ministers grumbled that policy was being whispered from the confessional rather than debated in council. In France, too, Jesuits found their way into royal circles, despite periodic expulsions and furious suspicion. Their sermons and their schools won admiration, even as accusations of regicide clung to them. Louis XIII, and later Louis XIV, both entertained Jesuit confessors, though the Sun King himself would bristle at the sense that these men owed greater loyalty to Rome than to him. And beyond Europe, Jesuits were not only missionaries but political brokers. In China, Matteo Ricci and his successors served as advisors to the imperial court, dazzling mandarins with astronomical predictions, mapping the heavens with accuracy that humbled even Confucian scholars. In India, Jesuits counseled princes, mediating between local traditions and European powers. In Paraguay, their reductions formed a strange political hybrid, part mission, part state, governed not by kings but by priests. Their role in politics was thus double-edged. They were trusted as wise counselors, as incorruptible confessors. But precisely because they were incorruptible, precisely because they answered to no court but Rome's, monarchs grew uneasy. A confessor who could deny absolution might deny more than forgiveness. He might deny legitimacy itself. A counselor who spoke with papal authority could make a king's conscience tremble. Picture again that royal chamber. The king bends his head in confession, murmuring sins of state, lies told, treaties broken, wars waged. The Jesuit listens, face impassive, hands folded. When he speaks, his words are gentle but firm. Sire, your soul is bound not to the crown, but to Christ. This course you take, is it just? Is it holy? The king frowns, feels the weight of guilt, reconsiders. Outside, ministers wait for orders, never knowing that the true decision has already been swayed, not in counsel but in conscience. Small wonder that enemies raged. To them, Jesuits were not spiritual guides but manipulators. Pamphlets accused them of toppling monarchs, of inciting assassinations, of bending thrones to papal will. Each royal confession became, in rumor, a political conspiracy. Each Jesuit counselor became, in imagination, a hidden hand steering the fate of nations. And yet, in truth, many Jesuits were reluctant politicians. Their own constitutions discouraged pursuit of worldly power, warning against entanglement in politics. But reality rarely obeys constitutions. Kings sought them out, bishops leaned on them, ministers feared them. And once at the side of power, it was impossible to avoid the charge of influence. So they remained, shadows in courts, voices in confessionals, advisors whose advice could alter empires. To friends, they were loyal counselors. To enemies, they were infiltrators. To themselves, they were simply servants of God. But history rarely accepts simplicity. And so the Jesuits became entwined with politics in ways they could never wholly escape. Their reputation, their myth, their mystery, all grew from this tension. A priest in a palace is never only a priest. A confessor to a king is never only a confessor. And thus we move onward, leaving the royal chambers heavy with incense and intrigue, stepping toward another landscape, one stranger still. For not content with advising monarchs, the Jesuits themselves built something resembling kingdoms, settlements where they ruled not through princes, but through priests. A curious experiment, nestled in the jungles of South America, that would one day be known as the Jesuit republics. Imagine the year as 1620. Deep in the forests of South America, along the great rivers that snake through what is now Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil, Jesuit missionaries labor to create something utterly unique. They gather indigenous Guarani people, who had been hunted by slavers and exploited by colonists, and lead them into settlements of a new design. These are not towns ruled by conquistadors, nor colonies built on forced labor. They are villages where Jesuits and Guarani live side by side, where the cross towers above the plaza, and where the rhythms of life blend European forms with indigenous traditions. Step into one of these villages with me. At its center is a wide square, shaded by palms. A church, vast and ornate by frontier standards, dominates one side. Carved wooden altars gleam with gold leaf. Choirs sing hymns in Guarani as well as Latin. Around the square are houses, built neatly in rows. Children chase each other in the dust. Women weave, men work at carpentry, farming, music. At dawn, bells call the community to prayer. At dusk, they ring again. Between those hours, the village hums with both devotion and productivity. This was the Jesuit experiment, to create communities that sheltered indigenous people from the brutality of colonists, while also converting them to Christianity and teaching them European crafts and governance. The Jesuits believed they were offering a sanctuary, a model of harmony, a utopia in the wilderness. And in many ways it worked. The Guarani learned music, sculpture, and architecture, producing choirs and artisans whose fame spread across the continent. They became skilled in European agriculture, while still retaining aspects of their traditional culture. Their villages prospered, often surpassing nearby colonial towns in order and stability. And unlike in most of Spanish America, where native populations were ravaged and enslaved, in the reductions they were defended by Jesuit fathers who stood fiercely against slavers. But to outsiders, the reductions looked less like sanctuaries and more like miniature states. States not loyal to Spain or Portugal, but to Rome and to the Society of Jesus. Each village was organized with military precision, the plaza, the church, the workshops, the homes, all arranged with purpose. The Jesuit fathers governed, assisted by indigenous leaders, enforcing discipline, administering justice. To some observers, this looked like the Jesuits were building their own kingdom in the jungle, a theocracy cloaked in cassocks, a republic of priests. Rumors spread quickly in Europe. Pamphleteers in Madrid and Lisbon muttered, "The Jesuits are kings in Paraguay." Ministers whispered. They command armies of Indians loyal to Rome, not to Spain. Enemies painted lurid images of black-robed priests ruling over native subjects as absolute monarchs, training them in warfare, hoarding gold. The truth was both less and more dramatic. The reductions were not kingdoms of wealth. The Jesuits lived simply, their communities supported by collective labor. But they did, in fact, train the Guarani in arms. Facing slave raids from Portuguese banderantes, the Jesuits realized that only force could defend their flocks. They armed indigenous militias, drilled them, and led them in battles that repelled slavers with shocking effectiveness. Here, in the dense forests, an indigenous army under Jesuit guidance defeated European raiders again and again. To the Guarani, this was liberation. To Spain and Portugal, it was unsettling. Colonists saw not grateful converts, but subjects escaping their control. Ministers saw not missions, but power bases. The reductions became a symbol of Jesuit independence, of their refusal to submit entirely to the crowns whose territories they occupied. And so suspicion thickened. Were these settlements truly for the salvation of souls, or were they experiments in social control, in priestly rule, in empire building? Step again into one of those jungle churches. Candles flicker on carved wooden saints, choirs of Guarani voices fill the rafters with polyphonic hymns learned from Europe yet infused with local rhythm. Outside, the militia drills, spears and muskets gleaming. In the workshops, artisans carve altarpieces that will one day astonish visitors. It is beautiful. It is ordered. It is, to European eyes, uncanny. Visitors wrote of the reductions with awe. Some saw them as utopias, examples of what Christian communities could be: equal, harmonious, industrious. Others saw them as sinister, cloaked dominions where Jesuits ruled unchecked, their black cassocks concealing ambitions as vast as any king's. By the 18th century, these suspicions would come to a head. Colonists resented Jesuit protection of indigenous people, whose labor they coveted. Ministers fumed at the society's independence. And monarchs, always uneasy about Jesuit influence, pointed to Paraguay as proof that the society was a state within a state, loyal only to Rome. The Jesuits defended themselves. They argued that they had only protected the weak, that their reductions were bulwarks of faith against both paganism and greed. And for a time, their vision held. For more than a century, the reductions thrived, tens of thousands of Guarani living in their shelter. But the world outside shifted. Colonial empires tightened their grip, and patience with Jesuit independence wore thin. By mid-century, when the society's enemies rose in power, the reductions would be dismantled, their dream undone. Still, the memory lingered. To their admirers, the Jesuits had built islands of justice in a sea of exploitation. To their enemies, they had built secret republics, training grounds for rebellion, priestly kingdoms hidden in the jungle. Both images would haunt the order forever. And so, from the confessionals of kings to the plazas of Paraguayan villages, the Jesuits seemed always to walk the line between ministry and power, between sanctuary and subversion. They counseled monarchs in Europe, and they governed communities in the New World. They were priests, but priests who ruled. And as their influence spread, so too did their enemies. Suspicion was mounting, hostility sharpening. The Jesuit republics, admired and feared, were only one reason. Across Europe, resentment was rising, among ministers, monarchs, rivals. Soon, that rising tide would break upon the society with destructive force. But before that storm comes, let us linger still in these shadowed histories, where admiration and fear always walk side by side. For next, we will hear the footsteps of those enemies, gathering at the thresholds of power, preparing to strike. The Jesuits, once lauded as saints and saviors, will soon be hunted as threats and traitors. The age of rising enemies was at hand. Picture France first. The 17th century has been a turbulent one: religious wars, regicides, shifting alliances. Jesuits, once expelled, have returned and found influence once again at court. They serve as confessors to queens, tutors to princes, preachers in Parisian pulpits. Their schools are packed, their sermons electrify. Yet beneath this prominence lies unease. Many in France's parliament and university faculties resent Jesuit control of education, resent their influence over the crown, resent their foreign obedience to Rome. The Sorbonne denounces them as intruders on French soil. Parliament decrees against them are written, challenged, repealed, reinstated. Then comes the assassination of Henry IV in 1610 by François Ravaillac, a Catholic zealot. Though the Jesuits are not directly linked, suspicion surges again. Did Jesuit rhetoric inspire the fanatic? Did their teachings on tyrannicide, or at least their enemies' caricatures of those teachings, give him courage? France's enemies of the society seize on the moment. Pamphlets scream, Jesuits, teachers of regicide. Jesuits, corrupters of youth. Though the order weathers the storm, their enemies multiply. Cross the Pyrenees into Spain, and the tension takes a different form. Here the monarchy is Catholic, the court devout. Jesuits thrive as confessors and counselors. Yet their very closeness breeds resentment. Ministers complain that they meddle in affairs of state, that the confessor wields more sway than the council chamber. Nobles resent Jesuit influence over the king's conscience, especially when absolution or its denial shapes policy. And always, there is suspicion about their letters to Rome. To Spanish ministers, every Jesuit report is potential betrayal, another secret slipping into papal hands. In Portugal, hostility sharpens further. Jesuits there wield immense influence over colonial missions, especially in Brazil, where they protect indigenous peoples from slavery and organize reductions. Colonists rage against them, accusing them of blocking profit, of denying the crown its due. Planters whisper, the Jesuits keep the Indians for themselves, under their rule, as if they were kings of the jungle. Tensions boil into open conflict, colonists clash with Jesuits in Brazil, slave hunters curse them, and at court, ministers begin to see them less as allies and more as obstacles. And beyond Iberia, hostility is not less but greater. In Protestant lands, Jesuits are vilified without mercy. In England, they are hunted as traitors, accused of plotting Elizabeth's death, linked to the gunpowder plot of 1605. In the Netherlands, they are portrayed as saboteurs, ever conspiring to subvert the Republic. In Germany, their role in the Counter-Reformation makes them lightning rods for Protestant fury. Everywhere, their very name becomes shorthand for deception, manipulation, subversion. The pamphlets swell in number. In Amsterdam, woodcuts depict Jesuits as serpents, coils wrapped around the globe. In London, broadsheets paint them as assassins in disguise, slipping poison into chalices, daggers into sleeves. In Paris, caricatures show them whispering into kings' ears while tightening chains around the people. The propaganda is relentless, and each crisis, each assassination, each rumor fuels it further. But it is not only propaganda. Monarchs themselves begin to act. France expels them more than once, each time recalling them reluctantly for their usefulness. Portugal and Spain tighten restrictions, resent their independence. In Venice, a proud republic suspicious of papal power, Jesuits are viewed with hostility. Even within Catholic Europe, their enemies circle ever closer. And yet, paradoxically, their success fuels the enmity. Their schools are too good, drawing the brightest students away from rivals. Their confessors are too trusted, shaping kings' consciences more than ministers. Their missions are too independent, protecting indigenous peoples at the expense of colonial profits. Their obedience is too absolute, pointing always to Rome, never to the crown. Every strength that made them formidable makes them resented. Pause with me for a moment in Lisbon in the mid-18th century. The court bustles, merchants count their fortunes from Brazil, ministers whisper of reform. And there, looming behind it all, is Sebastião José de Carvalho y Melo, better known as the Marquis of Pombal. Fierce, pragmatic, ruthless, he despises the Jesuits. To him they are parasites, meddling priests who hinder the crown, hoard power, and stand against his vision of a modern Portugal. In time, he will drive them out with fury, accusing them of treason and rebellion. In France, too, resentment crystallizes in the 18th century. The Enlightenment rises, philosophers rail against clerical power. Voltaire, Diderot, and others sharpen their wit against the Jesuits, mocking their schools, denouncing their influence. In salons and cafes, the society becomes the butt of satire, the symbol of medieval superstition. Political ministers see them not as allies but as rivals to royal power. And across Europe, by the mid-18th century, enemies gather in earnest. Kings, ministers, philosophers, colonists, Protestants, even rival Catholic orders, each has reason to resent the Jesuits. And as these resentments weave together, they form a net, drawing tighter and tighter. The reductions in Paraguay, once admired, are now cited as proof of Jesuit ambition. Their confessors at court, once trusted, are now accused of manipulating kings. Their schools, once praised, are now painted as indoctrination. Their loyalty to Rome, once their pride, is now their greatest liability. The tide of enemies is swelling, unstoppable. Soon it will break over them in a wave of suppression, sweeping them from the map. But not yet. For now, in this chapter of rising hostility, we see the gathering storm, the sharpening knives, the pamphlets blackening walls with accusations. The Jesuits still stand, still preach, still teach, still counsel kings. But the ground beneath their feet is trembling. And so we walk onward, hearing already the rumble of the storm to come. Beyond these rising enemies lies the collapse itself, the year 1773, when the order will be dissolved, scattered, exiled. But before that, the storm must break, and the enemies must strike. The hour of suppression is drawing near. But the storm does not break all at once. It builds slowly in waves. Already, in Portugal, the Marquis of Pombal has made his move. We see Lisbon in the 1750s, streets still scarred by the great earthquake of 1755, a city rebuilt under Pombal's iron will. And Pombal sees the Jesuits as obstacles to his reforms, enemies of his authority. He accuses them of meddling in colonial trade, of controlling indigenous populations in Brazil as if they were kings, of plotting rebellion. In 1759, he strikes. Soldiers march into Jesuit colleges, seize fathers, drag them through the streets. Jesuits are accused of treason, of conspiring against the crown, of fomenting revolt in the reductions of Paraguay. Their property is confiscated, their schools shuttered, their missions dismantled. Pombal, triumphant, has expelled the society from Portugal and its empire. To him, it is not only politics but personal. He sees the Jesuits as relics of medieval superstition, enemies of reason, rivals to state authority. France follows soon after. In Paris, philosophers sharpen their pens, Voltaire, Diderot, Rousseau, denouncing Jesuit casuistry, mocking their schools, deriding their obedience. The Parliament of Paris joins in, seizing on financial scandals, accusing the order of corruption. In 1764, Louis XV yields to pressure. Jesuits are suppressed in France, their schools closed, their priests exiled. Crowds watch as Jesuits file silently from their colleges, black cassocks brushing the cobblestones. Some weep, some curse, some stand in stunned silence. France, long a battleground of suspicion against the society, has cast them out. Spain is next. Charles III, eager to assert royal power, distrusts the Jesuits as agents of Rome, too loyal to the Pope, too independent in the colonies. In 1767, with sudden and ruthless efficiency, he orders their expulsion. Across Spain and its vast empire, soldiers arrive at dawn at Jesuit houses, reading decrees aloud. Fathers are roused from their beds, given no time to pack, marched under guard to ports. From Mexico to Manila, Jesuits are herded onto ships and sent into exile. The scenes are bitter, indigenous peoples in tears, students clinging to their teachers, colonial towns watching in silence as ships vanish over the horizon. The dominoes fall quickly. Naples and Parma, too, suppress them. Rulers across Europe, both Catholic and Protestant, seize the chance to rid themselves of men long feared and envied. And finally, the greatest blow comes from Rome itself. It is July 21st, 1773. In the Quirinal Palace in Rome, Pope Clement XIV signs the brief Dominus Ac Redemptor. His hand trembles, his face pale. He has resisted long, but the pressure of Bourbon monarchs, Spain, France, Naples, Portugal, has been relentless. They demand suppression. They threaten schism, rebellion, chaos. And so Clement yields. With a few strokes of the pen, he dissolves the Society of Jesus. The language of the brief is careful, cloaked in sorrow. The society, it says, has caused too much discord, too much suspicion. For the peace of the Church, it must cease to exist. There is no accusation of heresy, no condemnation of doctrine, only the cold weight of political necessity. And with that, the Jesuits are no more. The reaction is immediate and devastating. In Rome, the Jesuit general, Lorenzo Ricci, is arrested. He is imprisoned in Castel Sant'Angelo, the ancient fortress by the Tiber. There he languishes, denied trial, denied release, until his death in 1775. His cell becomes a symbol of the order's fate: silence, confinement, erasure. Across Europe and beyond, the decree is enforced. Jesuit colleges are closed, their libraries scattered, their churches reassigned. In missions across the world, chaos erupts. In Paraguay, the reductions collapse without their Jesuit shepherds, leaving indigenous communities vulnerable to slave raids. In China, the Jesuit dialogue with the imperial court falters, their astronomical work abandoned, their cultural bridges broken. In India, their missions weaken. From the Americas to Asia, centuries of labor unravel. And yet, the suppression is not uniform. In Prussia, Frederick the Great, pragmatic as ever, allows Jesuits to continue teaching, remarking dryly that they are the best schoolmasters I have. In Russia, Catherine the Great refuses to publish the brief, permitting Jesuits to remain, to educate, to endure. And so, in pockets, the society survives, flickering embers amid the ashes. Still, the blow is immense. Picture the silence of once bustling colleges, the empty chapels where choirs once sang, the abandoned missions in jungles and deserts. For 2 centuries, the Jesuits had seemed unstoppable, their reach stretching across continents, their name synonymous with discipline and influence. Now, with a single papal signature, they are gone. Or so it seems. For though the order is dissolved, its members remain, thousands of priests scattered, stripped of their identity, forced into exile, teaching in secret, writing in obscurity. The Society of Jesus has been broken, but not erased. Like seeds buried in the ground, they wait. And so, as we leave the silence of suppression, we sense already the stirring of return. The embers still glow, and in time, they will flare again. For history rarely allows a story to end so neatly. The Jesuits, silenced in 1773, will not remain so forever. The 19th century will see them rise once more, restored, renewed, and feared again. But for now, in this chapter of suppression, the corridors are silent, the colleges closed, the general imprisoned. The Society of Jesus, the order that once seemed unassailable, has been scattered by the hand of the very Pope they swore to obey. The world watches, some in triumph, some in sorrow, some in unease. For even in suppression, the Jesuits remain what they have always been: mysterious, controversial, impossible to ignore. Then let us walk on, softly, carrying the weight of that silence that fell in 1773, the shuttered classrooms, the abandoned missions, the black cassocks folded away like relics. For nearly 4 decades, the Society of Jesus seemed erased, their name forbidden, their general imprisoned, their houses dissolved. And yet silence is rarely the end of a story. Seeds do not cease to be seeds because they lie buried in the earth. In time, under pressure and light, they stir again. And so it was with the Jesuits. Their suppression was not their death. It was their winter. And winters pass. In Russia, the flame had never been extinguished. Catherine the Great, pragmatic and proud, looked at the papal decree and simply refused to publish it. To her, Jesuit teachers were too valuable, their schools too excellent to abandon. Why should she cripple her empire's education for the sake of Bourbon monarchs' vendettas? So, she allowed them to remain, quietly teaching, quietly training, quietly living as if suppression had never been declared. In Prussia, Frederick the Great did much the same. With his wry skepticism, he quipped that Jesuits were the best schoolmasters I have, and saw no reason to expel them. He was not moved by piety, nor loyalty to Rome, but by pragmatism. His kingdom needed teachers, and the Jesuits knew their craft. So, under Protestant kings and empresses, the order survived where Catholic monarchs had destroyed them. A strange irony, the soldiers of the Pope finding sanctuary under rulers who denied the Pope's authority. But in most of Europe, their absence was keenly felt. Universities floundered without their rigor. Mission fields collapsed without their leadership. Even their enemies discovered, in their silence, the measure of their contribution. The Jesuits had been both admired and despised, but they had never been ignored. And now, without them, something vital seemed missing. And among Catholics themselves, a quiet nostalgia grew. Scholars who had studied in Jesuit schools remembered their eloquence, their precision, their training. Missionaries in distant lands mourned the loss of guidance. Bishops wrote in guarded tones, lamenting the void left behind. The order's reputation, once so bruised, began to heal in absence. For memory softens edges, and the figure long absent begins to look noble. The world itself was changing, too. The 18th century's Bourbon monarchs, who had clamored for suppression, fell into turmoil. Revolution swept France, toppling Louis XVI. Spain and Portugal faltered in the currents of upheaval. By the dawn of the 19th century, the crowns that had demanded Jesuit destruction were weakened, their certainties shattered. And the papacy, once pressured into submission, began to feel the ground shift beneath its feet. Picture 1814. Europe is in ruins after the Napoleonic Wars. Monarchs are restored, but uneasily. Thrones tremble, borders shift, armies march and retreat. And in Rome, Pope Pius VII, weary from his own ordeals under Napoleon, considers the future. He has seen a world shaken by revolution, faith undermined by rationalist fervor, the Church attacked and humiliated. He knows that if Catholicism is to survive this new century, it will need strong defenders, disciplined soldiers, teachers, missionaries. He looks back at the Society of Jesus, suppressed, scattered, but never truly gone. And he makes his decision. On August 7, 1814, in the Church of Il Gesù in Rome, Pope Pius VII solemnly restores the Society of Jesus. The words are read aloud, echoing in the vaulted nave where Ignatius himself once prayed. The order, dissolved by Clement XIV 40 years earlier, is reborn. Tears stream down faces. Former Jesuits, aged but unbroken, kneel in gratitude. Young men, eager to join, watch with awe. The silence is ended. The seed has sprouted again. The restoration is not a simple return to the past. The Jesuits re-enter a world transformed. Enlightenment philosophy has reshaped thought. Revolutions have toppled monarchies. New ideologies, nationalism, liberalism, secularism, rise to challenge old structures. The Jesuits, once feared for their influence at court, now find monarchs themselves less absolute, less stable, less commanding. The battlefield of souls is no longer only in confessionals and palaces, but in schools, in parliaments, in the press. And yet, their mission remains the same. Education becomes their weapon once more. Across Europe, their colleges reopen, their schools flourish. In France, they are at the heart of Catholic revival. In Italy, Austria, Belgium, they rebuild networks of teaching, training, preaching. Their classrooms fill again with the sons of elites, and their disciplined methods, once denounced, are admired anew. In the wider world, they return to missions. In the Americas, they rebuild connections with indigenous peoples, though never again with the independence of Paraguay's reductions. In Asia, they re-enter fields where their old missions had faltered. They are not the first Europeans anymore. Protestant missionaries and secular powers are rivals now, but their old reputation gives them weight. In science and scholarship, too, they contribute again, mapping, studying, writing, debating. But there is also something new, something sharper. Their suppression has left them scarred, watchful, wary. They know how quickly kings can turn against them, how fragile papal support can be. And so they cultivate discretion more carefully, avoiding entanglement in politics where possible, focusing instead on education, missions, and scholarship. Their enemies, of course, still whisper, but the society has learned caution from its wounds. Imagine stepping once more into the corridors of a Jesuit college, now in the 19th century. The classrooms hum again. Latin declamations ring out. A teacher, stern yet brilliant, guides students through philosophy, theology, mathematics. The walls are lined with books once scattered but now reclaimed. There is life again, energy, purpose. The black cassocks move briskly, not in hiding but in pride. The society is alive, reborn, carrying its past like a scar, but striding into the future nonetheless. The restoration is not triumphal in the old style. The Jesuits of the 19th century are quieter, more focused, less entangled in royal confessionals. Their strength lies in teaching, in defending the Church against modern philosophies, in shaping the next generation. Their revival is steady, cautious, enduring. And yet, as always, myths and suspicions follow them. Enemies of Catholicism whisper again of conspiracies, of Jesuits controlling the Vatican, of secret power hidden in black cassocks. But the society, seasoned by suppression, endures the slander with patience. They know the rhythm now: admiration, suspicion, hostility, survival. It is a dance they have already mastered. So the order returns, scarred but unbroken, humbled but alive. Suppression could scatter them, but not destroy them. Exile could silence them, but not erase them. And in the silence, the seed of revival had only grown stronger. The Jesuits are back. And once more, their footsteps echo through classrooms, missions, chapels, and the corridors of Rome itself. The story, then let us walk on, softly, carrying the weight of that silence that fell in 1773, the shuttered classrooms, the abandoned missions, the black cassocks folded away like relics. For nearly 4 decades, the Society of Jesus seemed erased, their name forbidden, their general imprisoned, their houses dissolved. And yet silence is rarely the end of a story. Seeds do not cease to be seeds because they lie buried in the earth. In time, under pressure and light, they stir again. And so it was with the Jesuits. Their suppression was not their death. It was their winter. And winters pass. In Russia, the flame had never been extinguished. Catherine the Great, pragmatic and proud, looked at the papal decree and simply refused to. Then let us follow the Jesuits further, for revival is never a return to innocence. Once reborn, they move again through classrooms and missions, through the courts of Rome and the parishes of Europe. But even as they rebuild their schools, even as their voices rise once more from pulpits, the shadows thicken around them. For the Jesuits do not only live in history. They also live in imagination, and in that imagination, they loom vast, mysterious, sinister. The Society of Jesus has always attracted suspicion, but after their suppression and dramatic restoration, the world's appetite for rumor and myth only grows. It is here that we step into another hall, not of stone or wood, but of whispers, the chamber of conspiracy. Picture the scene. A candlelit salon in Paris, 1820. The revolution has passed, the Bourbon monarchy restored, but the air still brims with unease. Philosophers and journalists gather, their voices sharp with suspicion. The Jesuits are back, someone murmurs, and already they plot. Another leans forward, eyes glittering. You think they were ever gone? Suppressed, yes, but scattered only to return stronger. They are the hidden hand. The Church's secret police. Heads nod. Pens scratch. Pamphlets will follow by morning. The charge is not new, but it has gained new life. To their enemies, the Jesuits are not merely priests. They are puppeteers of monarchs, infiltrators of parliaments, architects of secret empires. Their discipline, their obedience, their global network, all of it lends itself to suspicion. What other order requires its members to vow special obedience to the Pope? What other priest travels so far, knows so many languages, penetrates so many courts and villages? To those who mistrust them, the answer is clear. The Jesuits are not simply missionaries, but spies. Even the very titles of their leaders fed the myths. The general of the order, known as the Superior General, lived in Rome in a modest house beside the Gesù. But his black cassock, his global authority, his unseen hand guiding thousands gave him another name in rumor, the Black Pope. To many, this was not mere metaphor. Pamphlets and sermons whispered that the Black Pope was the true ruler of Rome, the one who directed the White Pope like a puppet. From this seed, whole forests of conspiracy would grow. In Protestant Europe, the tales multiplied. In England, Jesuits were said to hide in taverns and alleys, plotting the downfall of the crown. The gunpowder plot of 1605, though not directly tied to them, continued to stain their name. To generations of English Protestants, the Jesuit was the archetypal traitor. In Germany and Switzerland, pamphlets declared them corrupters of youth, brainwashers in their schools, preparing armies of Catholic zealots to overthrow Protestant freedom. In Catholic lands, suspicion took other forms. In France, radicals accused them of undermining liberty, of steering kings toward tyranny. During the Revolution, they were painted as agents of Rome, enemies of Enlightenment reason. In Spain and Portugal, colonists remembered their reductions in Paraguay and muttered, "They ruled like kings there. What stops them from ruling us again?" Even in the New World, whispers followed. In the young United States, where Catholics were a small minority, Jesuits were eyed with suspicion by Protestants who saw them as foot soldiers of papal tyranny. The fear of popery bled into fear of Jesuit intrigue. Their colleges, opened in Maryland and elsewhere, were denounced by some as training grounds for sedition. And the Jesuits themselves? They did little to dispel the aura of mystery. Their discipline demanded silence about internal matters, their constitutions hidden from public view, their obedience remarkable. They did not answer every slander. They did not publish every truth. Silence to them was strength. But to the suspicious, silence was confirmation. The conspiracies took on wild shapes. Some claimed Jesuits orchestrated assassinations of monarchs, from Henry IV of France to later kings who fell to bullets and daggers. Others imagined them as financial manipulators, controlling banks and trade behind the scenes. Still others declared them masters of revolution, paradoxically blamed for both defending monarchs and toppling them. To radicals, Jesuits were tyrants. To royalists, they were revolutionaries. To both, they were guilty. And always, the myth of secret initiation fueled the stories. Outsiders imagined sinister rites, novices swearing blood oaths to kill heretics, daggers laid upon altars, skulls upon which oaths were spoken. Pamphlets circulated with lurid Jesuit vows, fabrications filled with violence and treachery, widely believed despite their implausibility. In these forgeries, Jesuits pledged to infiltrate governments, to betray friends, to kill without mercy at Rome's command. The truth of their long and grueling formation was demanding enough, but rumor gilded it with terror. Step with me into a darker chamber, the world of polemic literature. From Amsterdam to Paris, from London to Madrid, presses thundered with anti-Jesuit tracts. Satirical plays painted them as buffoons, greedy and sly. Novels cast them as villains, sinister priests manipulating innocent souls. Histories twisted facts to present them as agents of endless plots. In every century from the 16th onward, new books appeared, weaving the same themes: secrecy, manipulation, ambition. Even in modern times, the legends endure. The Jesuits are accused of steering revolutions, of orchestrating world wars, of masterminding global conspiracies. In the fevered imaginations of some, they are still the hidden hand behind governments and popes, still the invisible empire cloaked in black. And yet, the truth remains more complex. The Jesuits were, and are, teachers, missionaries, scholars, preachers. They were controversial, often entangled in politics, sometimes guilty of overreach, sometimes heroic in sacrifice. They were admired for their brilliance, and hated for their discipline. But in myth, they became something else entirely: symbols of fear, projections of enemies' anxieties, the perfect villains for every age. Imagine now walking with me through a library, its shelves filled with these polemics. Dusty pamphlets cry out against Jesuit tyranny. Engravings show hooded priests conspiring with daggers. Pamphlets from the French Enlightenment rail against their schools. Broadsheets from England warn of Jesuit plots. And yet, beside them, sit the works of Jesuits themselves: treatises on theology, maps of the stars, grammars of native languages, histories of distant lands. The contrast is stark. One shelf shows them as monsters, the other reveals them as scholars. Between the two lies the tension of myth and reality. And perhaps that is the essence of the Jesuit story. They lived so vividly, so publicly, so controversially, that they became mirrors for the fears of the world. Their secrecy was exaggerated into sinister plots, their discipline painted as servility, their loyalty as treachery. They became, in imagination, larger than life, shadows cast across history. So as the 19th century turns to the 20th, and the whispers of conspiracy still swirl, the Jesuits endure. Their myths have become inseparable from their history, their legends as enduring as their schools. Even today, the phrase, Jesuitical, suggests cunning, subtlety, manipulation, a legacy of centuries of rumor. And yet, beneath the myths, they remain what they have always been: men bound by vows, flawed and brilliant, controversial and devoted, their footsteps still echoing through corridors of power and prayer. Now, as we leave this chamber of myth and conspiracy, we move into the last and quietest hall. The noise of pamphlets and whispers fades. The world of rumor falls away. And we are left with silence. The silence of corridors where Jesuit footsteps still echo, where secrets remain veiled, where the true story waits in shadows. The silence of the corridors awaits us. Imagine walking now through the Mother Church of the Order, Illinois Gesù in Rome. By day, its Baroque altars blaze with gold, its frescoed ceiling dazzles with light. But at night, after the tourists leave, after the candles are snuffed, the church returns to stillness. You hear your own footsteps on marble. Somewhere, far in the apse, a Jesuit prays alone. The hush feels alive, as though the walls remember centuries of whispers. Ignatius himself kneeling in rapture, Ricci plotting his journey to China, Ricci's successors burying letters from missions in distant continents. The silence seems full, not empty, heavy with memory. Step beyond the church into the corridors of the Collegio Romano, once the beating heart of Jesuit education. The students are gone, the classrooms dark. You walk past closed doors, past shelves heavy with books in Latin, Greek, Chinese, Sanskrit. These corridors, like veins, carried the lifeblood of the order: knowledge, discipline, mission. And even now, in their stillness, you feel the pulse. The Jesuits cultivated silence as a discipline. Their spiritual exercises, written by Ignatius, are filled with instructions for contemplation, meditation, listening for the still, small voice of God. Silence was not absence for them, but presence. It was the space where truth revealed itself. In retreat houses across centuries, novices learned to keep silent not only with their tongues but with their souls, training themselves to hear the faintest stirrings of conscience. Yet silence also became the cloak of their reputation. Outsiders, hearing little, imagined much. If Jesuits did not reveal their rituals, then surely those rituals were sinister. If Jesuits did not speak of their politics, then surely their politics were dark. If Jesuits kept their archives sealed, then surely within lay evidence of plots. Silence, meant as a spiritual discipline, became to the suspicious a sign of conspiracy. Picture again those royal confessionals. A king whispers, a Jesuit listens. The world outside does not hear. What counsel is given? What advice shapes the fate of kingdoms? No one knows. The seal of confession is absolute, the silence unbroken. And so, history fills the gap with speculation. Did Jesuits counsel regicide? Did they forbid war or encourage it? Did they bend kings toward Rome? The truth, hidden in silence, becomes legend. Or picture the Jesuit missions in distant lands. Letters took months, even years, to reach Europe. And when they arrived, they were often carefully worded, circumspect, edited before publication. What happened in those reductions, in those courts of China, in those villages of India? The silence between letters was filled with rumor. Were the Jesuits building kingdoms of their own? Were they converting, or compromising? Again, silence bred suspicion. And yet, within the corridors themselves, silence was not sinister. It was practical, protective, holy. A Jesuit in the 17th century might rise before dawn, keep silence through prayer, through study, through meals. Words were reserved for teaching, preaching, counsel. The corridors echoed with footsteps, but little else. Even now, if you visit a Jesuit retreat house, you may find such silence, men moving quietly, absorbed in contemplation, their presence felt more than heard. Let us linger in one of those retreat houses. The stone walls are thick, shutting out the noise of the world. A narrow window lets in a sliver of light. In the small chapel, a crucifix hangs unadorned. You sit on a wooden bench, and all around you is stillness. Hours pass. A bell rings. Jesuits pass by silent, their eyes lowered. You begin to notice the creak of the wood, the rustle of cassocks, the breath of prayer. Silence becomes sound, alive with subtleties you had never noticed. This is the silence of the corridors, a silence that listens, that watches, that waits. But in history's imagination, that same silence becomes haunted. Enemies picture cloaked figures plotting in hushed voices, decisions made in shadows, secrets never shared. And perhaps, in truth, both versions are real. For silence can be both holy and strategic. It can shield prayer, but it can also shield politics. It can preserve humility, but it can also preserve secrecy. The Jesuits walked that tension constantly, and their corridors remain echo chambers of that dual silence. Today, if you wander through Jesuit houses in Rome or across the world, you may feel it still. The order has survived suppression, revival, myth, and rumor. It continues to teach, to preach, to guide. But it does so with the same quiet discipline that has always marked it. No loud proclamations, no garish banners. Their strength lies not in noise, but in endurance and silence. And so we end our journey where we began, walking through shadows, hearing footsteps, sensing presences half hidden. The Jesuits remain, not as conquerors, not as kings, but as quiet figures in corridors where secrets still breathe. Their story is one of fire and rumor, of power and persecution, but also of silence, a silence that endures, that conceals, that defines them. So, as the night deepens and our wandering comes to rest, let us leave the corridors gently. Let us step back from Iogissu, from Parisian salons, from Paraguayan plazas, from prisons and missions. The Jesuits remain inside, their footsteps still echoing, their silence still speaking. And we, standing outside, can only listen. For history is loud with battles and decrees, but it is in the silences that its mysteries dwell. And the Jesuits, ever disciplined, ever secretive, ever enduring, have mastered that silence. And so, as the night settles, may these echoes of the past guide you gently into dreams,